Welcome back to another Extreme Movie Night. Tonight, I figured we'd delve back into some more French extreme films. However, we aren't going to be doing a Gaspar Noé film like usual, like my past videos on I Stand Alone or Irreversible. But this time, we are going to be doing a Fabrice Du Wells movie called Calvaire, which in English means The Ordeal. And although it doesn't have the same director as I Stand Alone or Irreversible, one of the main villains is played by the same guy who played the protagonist in I Stand Alone. There are also some moments in this movie that are almost comical, which is quite different from other extreme French movies we've seen. However, the themes and message at the end are just as dark as always. And I do quite enjoy this one just like the other French films we've done. If you don't know how we do things on this channel, let me break it down for you. We start out with an intro, which you are listening to now, where we discuss a little bit about the movie and its directors and writers. Then we get into the summary, where we do just that, summarize the movie. This is usually the longest part of the video, and where you'll get most of the contents. And then finally we get into the analysis, where we discuss the characters and themes of the work. But before I get into it, I want to make a small announcement about the next couple weeks. I have decided to forego the Dead Inside Extreme Book Club as I read it, and I didn't really enjoy it that much. And I feel my heart really wouldn't be in that review. So we're going to jump straight into The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka for next week's Extreme Book Club instead. But don't worry, I do have a rather intense video game video ready for the week after that. But please let me know in the comments if you have any more extreme movies or books you'd like me to cover. If I like the suggestion, I might put your comment in a video and cover it. But without waffling on any further into this intro than I already have, let us get into Fabrice Du Wells' Calvaire. The movie starts with a red screen and credits. Pretty normal, until it fades into what looks like some performer doing his makeup. He hums to himself and he's in a fluffy white shirt. He stares at himself in the mirror now, ready for his show. After this, we see a stage. The name Mark Stevens is on the banners in the background. Then the audience claps as the man himself comes out in a large cape with a golden embroidered Mark Stevens on the back in big lettering. He sings a love song, but then we see he is singing at an old folks home. He sings a song and performs and goes up to an old lady in the crowd and almost seems to be singing to her. Part of the performance, of course. They clap when the song is over, and he wishes them all a Merry Christmas. He says soon the new year will be here, and it will be a year full of love songs. He then goes back to his dressing room and removes his makeup, when that old lady he was singing to comes into his dressing room. She sits down and he welcomes her. She says that she loves his songs, and he politely thanks her. She says she may no longer be here when he returns from his trip down south. She is old. Mark says don't say stuff like that. She has many good years ahead of her. She then sheepishly asks Mark for a favor, and Mark says, of course, anything. She then takes his hand and slowly puts it over her privates. Mark quickly pulls back and almost looks shocked and surprised. She says that he sang that song to her specifically today, right? And when Mark doesn't answer and implies that it was just a performance, she says she feels such shame and she can't even bear to look at him anymore. She misread the whole song wholly. She calls herself a dirty whore and then leaves. Mark looks in the mirror again. He can't be singing in these old folks' homes anymore. He's above this. As he leaves, he says he's going to a Christmas gala on a trip. Some important people will be there and it could be his big break. And it looks like a nurse says that everyone here at this old folks' home loves him. He should stay. Mark says he knows, but he's got to be going to the gala. The nurse stares at him strangely and then she gives him an envelope. As Mark starts to leave, she runs and stands in front of him. She begs to hug him before he leaves. He does so quietly, and she says she's gonna miss him dearly. Mark looks really uncomfortable as he stares up and sees that the old lady from before is watching them hug in the window. Mark then says, okay, he really has to go now, and to let go of him, please. He gets in the van as the nurse watches from the driver's side window. He has trouble starting the van, but eventually he gets it, and then he leaves the old folks' home. He drives for a long time in the French countryside, several minutes worth of this, and at several points his van starts to stutter and make weird noises, but it seems to be okay for the moment. Hours pass later and he continues to drive and it starts to get very foggy, like some Silent Hill type shit. He drives slowly up the road until he stops his car in the woods. He can hardly see 2 feet in front of him and he pulls out a map. He yawns, tired from his drive, and when he looks up, he sees a sign for an inn on a tree, one called Bartell Inn. He drives up the road a little bit further and it starts to pour. He drives forward until something jumps in front of his car suddenly. The only jump scare in this movie, by the way, and it slightly got me. He slams on the brakes when whatever was in front of his car jumped in front of it, and whatever he did seems to have messed up his van. It stutters some more and no longer starts after this. It has begun to rain extremely heavy. Mark grabs a flashlight from the back of his van and gets out of the van. He opens the hood, but he doesn't seem to know much about cars. But it's smoking, so that's probably not good. He grabs a cell phone from the passenger seat, and when he turns back around, a ghostly white face is pressed against his window. Mark screams, but it just seems to be a guy. He just calls out, "Have you seen my dog?" Mark rolls down his window to hear him better. Mark says, well, he saw something dash in front of his car, but he doesn't know if it was a dog or not. He points to where he thinks it is, and this guy is really weird. He just runs in the direction and calls for Bella, his dog. Mark gets out of his car and chases after the guy, and he just reappears out of nowhere, and he says, "My name's Boris." Mark says, okay, he saw a sign for an inn and he's wondering where that is. His van just broke down, as you can see. Boris says, "I can't show you, I have to find Bella." Mark says, "Then just tell me where the inn is." Boris then goes silent and acts strangely. But then he whispers and says, "I'll take you there, but we have to whisper so we can hear Bella if she's around." Mark says, well, okay, but he can't just leave his van in the middle of the road. Boris then shushes Mark, and Mark quickly runs back and turns off his van and follows this strange man. They walk through the woods together for a while, and Mark asks if he's sure he can leave his van there, but Boris just once again shushes him. Mark then asks, "Are we almost there?" And then Boris once again tells him to shut his mouth. They walk through the woods for a while until they walk up upon a big house. Boris then screams very loudly, "Mr. Bartell! I brought you someone!" An old man then turns on the light in the top floor of the house and looks out the window, annoyed. He sees Mark and comes downstairs to the two men. Boris says, "This guy wants a room right here," and then just strangely runs back into the woods again. Bartell comes down, and Mark says he's sorry to wake him, but his van broke down in the woods and he needs a room for the night. Bartell, annoyedly or tiredly, just says, "Fine, just come in." He takes him upstairs and says no one's stayed in the inn in a long time, but all the rooms are clean anyway. He throws Mark in a room without ceremony and tells him good night as he goes back to bed. Mark sets his stuff down on the bed, and it seems like a cozy enough inn. He opens the wardrobe and sees nothing but towels inside. But Mark's tired, so he just lies down and goes to bed. The next morning, Mark wakes up and looks through his window. It seems Bartell and Boris have towed his van back to the inn, which is very kind of them. Boris does a very awkward wave in the window, and Mark gets dressed. Bartell then asks Mark how he slept as he walks down. Bartell says, oh, he's dabbled in mechanics before. He can help Mark, actually. He can fix his van. Mark says, that's very kind, but not necessary. But Bartell says nonsense. Besides, they're colleagues after all. He saw the inscription on his van. He's a singer, right? Bartell says he's also a performer. A comedian. And once a comedian, always a comedian. See, they're both performers. Bartell seems much more kind this morning, and he says, I'm gonna fix your car and make you a big breakfast. Mark says that's okay, he doesn't want to bother him, he'll just call a mechanic. But Boris interrupts and calls out for Bella! And looks around rapidly. He seems to not be all there mentally. Bartell looks at him too and says he wishes Boris would find his dog. His head hasn't been the same since she ran away. Mark then tries to call someone on his cell phone, but it doesn't work for some reason. He then asks Bartell, do you have a phone inside? But Bartell sort of dodges the question, but eventually says, of course I have a phone. I'm not a savage. Bartell then goes inside and talks on the phone to a mechanic, but we only hear Bartell's side of the conversation. He talks for a minute and then puts the phone back on the receiver. And he says, I'm sorry, Mark. He says the mechanic's gonna be busy today, but don't worry, I'll fix the van myself. Mark says, no, it's okay. But Bartell says, what's the hurry? Mark says, well, he has a Christmas gala to get to on the 25th. And Bartell says, oh, it's only the 23rd. He has 2 days. It's okay. So yes, this is a Christmas movie. Right there with other classic Christmas movies like The Grinch and Jingle All the Way and Elf and now Calvaire. How festive. Bartell then says, just relax, Mark. You have time. Besides, performers like us, we need to recharge our batteries, right? He then makes him a big breakfast, and Mark says, thank you, it's very good. He looks out the window behind him while eating to see Bartell looking at his van. But Bartell doesn't really look like he knows what he's doing. So Mark comes out and asks if he can help in some way, but Bartell says, just relax, he'll take care of it. Mark says, okay, well, he's gonna go for a walk in the meantime then. But then the tone shifts very suddenly and Bartell says, don't go down into the village though if you walk. Mark says, why? And Bartell says, those people? They're not like you and me. They're not performers, right? Mark looks at Bartell strangely and then says, okay, I won't go to the village, but why? Bartell then almost breaks down and cries while trying to explain. Mark just confusedly says, okay, Bartell, calm down. I'm not going to go to the village. Bartell then says, you promise? And Mark says, yeah, man, sure, whatever. And then Mark leaves and Bartell watches over and wishes him a nice walk. After Mark is clear out of sight, though, Bartell breaks into his van and looks through his stuff. He sees his clothes and his letters, and he sees that envelope from the beginning that the nurse gave him, and when he opens it, it's a bunch of nude photos of the nurse. He looks through them and puts them in his pocket. He then looks further through all of Mark's documents and takes the phone from the front seat and leaves the van. It seems that Bartell is not as benevolent as we once thought. Back with Mark, he of course did not listen to Bartell and went on a nice winter walk to the village. As he approaches a house, he hears a pig squealing. He decides to investigate, but he makes sure to not be seen. He sees a bunch of villagers grabbing a pig in a barn and saying, oh, it's tender, all right. One of the men says this, and then, well, another one of them drops trow, and, well, it doesn't show it, but it's implied that he bangs the pig. The scene ends with an extremely loud squeal as the man finishes, and Mark runs away from this horrifying scene, terrified. When he gets back to the house, Bartell is on the phone. He asks, how did Mark's walk go? And Mark says quietly that it's a nice region. And then Bartell seems to pick up on what happened and accuses him of going to the village. Mark says he promises he didn't go to the village, seriously. Mark then changes the subject and says, what about the van? What happened with the van? Bartell says, it looks like it's something with the battery. I just called the mechanic and he can get here, but not any time before tomorrow. Mark says, that's impossible. I have to get going. I'm going to go try and fix it myself. But Bartell then acts very strange about it and says, don't go out there, Mark. Don't try the car. I worked on it all afternoon. You gotta trust me. Don't be obstinate. Mark then stops and looks back at Bartell, and Bartell says, I'm gonna prepare you a nice dinner, and I promise you'll be off tomorrow. Mark seems to just agree with this, just so Bartell doesn't get angry, and goes back into the house. At dinner, Bartell gives Mark some food, and he says, this food used to be so popular when the inn was still getting guests. Performers used to love to come here, he says. But then Gloria left. His wife. She left him a long time ago. She was a singer like Mark, actually. She was wonderfully talented. He then starts to break down and cry about his late wife, and Mark apologizes for bringing it up, which he didn't, by the way. But Bartell says it's okay. Mark then asks, why does Bartell hate the villagers then? But Bartell dodges the question and says, yeah, my wife was so talented. And then he pulls out a trophy, a prize for his outstanding stand-up routine, he says. He says he used to be such a good comic, but when Gloria left, his enthusiasm for comedy went with her. He used to be happy as a lark, singing to himself, always telling jokes. He then says, here's one of my favorites I used to tell. There once was an association of dwarves, little people. They created a football club right above a bar one day. They would meet there every Sunday after the game. But one day in the bar, a different man comes into the bar and drinks a beer. And then he sees a little person come down the stairs in a blue jersey. Then another one, then 2, then 3, then 11 of them. He thinks to himself, wow, he's got to be really drunk to have seen something like that. So he asks the bartender for another whiskey. He drinks it down and looks back at the stairs and sees another little person come down the stairs. This time wearing a red jersey. Then 2 of them, then 3 of them, then 11, just like last time. He orders another whiskey after that and says to the bartender, I don't want to worry you, but the people from your foosball table are running away. They both laugh slightly at this joke, and Mark says, it actually wasn't that bad of a joke. Bartell says back in the day, Mark would have been rolling on the floor laughing, because he just doesn't have the enthusiasm for comedy anymore ever since Gloria left, he says. Bartell then begins crying and saying, when a woman you love leaves you, it messes you up. Mark says, it's okay, but I've got to get up early tomorrow. So I'm going to go to bed. Bartell says, so early to bed like this? Why don't you sing me a song first? I told you a joke. Can't you sing me a song? Mark, feeling a little trapped, decides to do so. He sings the song and then says he's gonna go to bed now. He asks if Bartell can wake him up after his performance, but then Bartell just says, "Thank you for this wonderful moment, Mark." Mark then smiles at him and retires to bed, while Bartell looks contemplative, alone. The next morning, Mark wakes up to a branch tapping at his window. He quickly gets up and puts on some clothes. It looks like Bartell didn't wake him. He goes downstairs and looks all over the house for Bartell, but he's nowhere to be found. He tries the phone that Bartell's been using, but the wire's been cut. I don't know if this is implying that Bartell was never talking to anyone, or if he just cut it this morning. But either way, Mark realizes now something's off. So Mark goes outside to his van and looks inside it for a cell phone, but he can't seem to find that either. He then sees Boris walk around, and Mark runs up to him and says, "Have you seen Bartell?" But Boris just tells Mark to leave him alone. He's never gonna find Bella. Mark says, "Yeah, whatever, sorry about your dog, but where's Bartell?" Boris just cries and says, "She's all alone in the woods, Mark. Cold." Boris ignores Mark then completely. Mark chases him, but Boris runs faster than him. So Mark can do nothing but return to the house. He looks in his car's hood first, though, and sees that the battery is just completely gone at this point. Mark calls out for Bartell, now concerned, and checks Bartell's room. Inside, he sure enough finds his own cell phone, and those nudie photos. As he's looking through them, though, Bartell walks in, cloaked in shadow. Mark stares at him accusedly and says, "You didn't wake me up. And the battery to my car is gone." Bartell says, "I didn't wake you up, Mark, because you were so sound asleep. I'm not used to it." Bartell then lies and says that, "And in regards to your phone, you left it on the table last night. I was going to return it this morning." Mark doesn't even mention the photos and walks out with Bartell, but there's a clear tension now. Bartell then just cries to himself slightly as Mark walks back in the house. As Mark gets in, he sees that his phone is still not working. He goes in his room, but as he does, he sees that there are now women's clothes in his closet for some reason. He's interrupted by a loud crash outside, though. He quickly looks out the window to see who else but Bartell is smashing his van with a hammer. Mark recoils at the sound and then runs downstairs to yell at Bartell and asks, "What's he doing?" But when he gets down, Bartell takes out a gas can and covers his van in it. Mark says, "What's wrong with you? Stop!" Bartell fumbles with the match, but then he drops it and then picks up a car battery. He looks at Mark and then says something very weird to him. He says, "Why did you come back if you were just gonna leave me again? Just to crush my heart. Again?" But before Mark can even react, all we see is Mark's bloody face falling to the floor. It seems that Bartell has hit him with the battery. Mark's not dead, just injured and knocked out. Bartell grabs a match and throws it at the van. He leaves Mark in the snow as the van explodes next to him. Bartell then drags Mark's unconscious body up the stairs and back to his room. There, he takes the women's clothes from his dresser and puts them on Mark's unconscious body. So yes, if you couldn't figure it out by now, Bartell seems to have snapped, and he believes that Mark is his late wife, or at the very least, he's gonna make Mark into his late wife. After this, he starts to shave Mark's head, and Mark cries the entire time. He begs and he says he won't tell anyone about anything he's seen here. He swears. But Bartell doesn't even answer him. The only audio that can be heard in this scene is Mark's wails as his head gets half shaven. After it's mostly over, Bartell says in an almost calling voice, saying, "See, it's better when you don't struggle. I'm doing this to protect you. I don't enjoy making you look ugly." And he seems genuine, too. He genuinely is just a very ill person, it seems like. After, Bartell goes upstairs into his room and he looks at himself in the mirror. We can hear a few cries in the background. Only when he slightly moves and takes off his bathrobe do we see that Mark is lying in his bed, still dressed in glorious clothes. Bartell lies down and spoons him happily. Mark cries in a way that is very real sounding. It genuinely made me uncomfortable. The next day, Bartell puts Mark on his tractor and says, "You'll see, it's gonna be the best Christmas ever. Where did you put my axe? You're always hiding things from me, Gloria. Come on, let's go cut down our Christmas tree." He then shows Mark the axe and says if he runs away again, he'll split him like a log, and then he laughs a really genuine sounding laugh. as if he's being a comedian again, and he thinks he's really funny. After which, he moves the back of the tractor up and down like a carnival ride with Mark on it, and he starts laughing and laughing as if this whole thing is really funny to him. Mark, of course, says nothing and just stares into the ground. They then drive into the forest, and as Bartell cuts down a tree, Mark sees his opportunity and escapes. Why did Bartell not tie him down? Well, like I said, I genuinely think he thinks that Mark is his wife. After Bartell notices that Mark ran, he yells out, calling him a bitch and a whore. But Mark is already long gone. He escaped. Mark runs for a while until, by a cruel twist of fate, he steps in a hunter's trap and he's unable to get the thing off of his leg. He is stuck lying in the dirt for hours. Late that night, someone comes by, and it's not Bartell, but Boris. Mark calls out for him, and Boris just pets him, and he says, "Daddy promised me he'd help me find Bella." Mark just begs for Boris to untie him, but Boris just continues to pet him. Boris isn't really all there either. Mark then bites Boris to get his attention, but Boris just runs away. But Mark says he's sorry, and he just wants Boris to come back and untie him, please! But Boris doesn't come back for a while. When he does, it's the next day. He lifts Mark up and delivers him right back to Bartell's wagon. Mark is out cold, or he's knocked out. Bartell covers his quote-unquote wife with a blanket to keep him warm in the back of the tractor. Bartell then promises Boris that if he's obstinate, he'll find Bella. He promises. Boris just stares at Bartell. And Bartell then coughs and says, "You'll be obstinate and keep looking for your dog, and you'll find her, right?" Boris once again says nothing, and Bartell says, "That's the spirit." Bartell then bids Boris farewell, and he says he has to get going back to the house. And he leaves Boris behind and drags Mark in his wagon behind the tractor. Seems like Mark isn't gonna get away that easily. As they drive, a few villagers appear to be tying a boar and gutting it near a tree. They then look at the tractor as it drives by nearby, and they see someone they don't know in it. One of the villagers is an old man with a beard. And yes, this is the same actor who played the main character in I Stand Alone, another French movie we did. His name is Philippe Nahon, and he unfortunately passed away in 2020 at the age of 81. But he is the villain in this movie as well. Back at the inn, Bartell literally crucifies Mark as a punishment. He says he doesn't want to do this, but it's a punishment for a reason. Outside though, the two villagers that were just there watch inside the window. Bartell thinks he hears something and runs towards them with a shotgun, only to find nothing. But he's suspicious that the villagers have found them. He looks back at his crucified victim and says, "Don't forget that I know! I tried forgiving you, but I know exactly what's going on!" He then slams the barn door and leaves Mark there alone, crucified. Mark can do nothing but endure the pain of the nails driven into his arms. This is also the third time on my channel that someone has been crucified. The first was in the book Hallowed Be Thy Gore, the second was on Horsehead, and now this one. It's very weird that it happens so often on this channel. Bartell then takes a shotgun and walks towards town. He passes a bunch of kids in red raincoats, which are never seen again or mentioned again, by the way. No idea what that's about. And he gets into town late at night and walks into the bar. As he does, everyone stares at him intensely. Seems like the villagers don't like Bartell. Bartell goes up to the barkeep and asks for a beer, but the barkeep ignores him and helps a different customer instead. After helping the other guy, he finally helps Bartell. Bartell pays, but another villager stops him, and Bartell yells out to all the other villagers that he's here to warn them. If any one of them come around his property again, he'll shoot them. He just wants to live in peace. He says the first one who makes a move on his new wife is dead. The butcher then asks him what makes him think that this is his wife. Then he tells Bartell to shove his threats up his ass. Bartell keeps saying, "My wife! Mine!" Then as he's about to leave, he pulls the gun out and points it at them. Then the strangest part of the entire movie plays. All the villagers sit in silence as Bartell leaves. But one of them goes up to a piano in the bar. He slams on the high keys, and then the low keys, and then the high keys, and then the low keys. Then he starts playing this insane song. I recommend you watching the movie just for this one scene. All of the villagers get up and start dancing in a weird, feverish way to this horrifying song. The piano player plays this horrifyingly off-key song, and all the villagers seem to be ecstatic to be hearing this song, and that there's finally a woman in town again. This scene makes the whole movie for me. As they all dance to this insane song, the butcher does not dance, and he just sits there and does nothing, staring into space. Back at Bartell's inn, he finally seems to have let Mark down from his crucifix. Mark eats his soup with Bartell watching. Bartell laughs and says, "It must feel good to eat soup again, right?" Bartell says, "Let's just put all this behind us, okay? Let's live as we used to, as husband and wife." Mark just nods his head as the blood drips from his wounds. Bartell laughs and says, "Be careful, you're dripping all over, Gloria." He then says, "Let's start up the inn again. I can do comedy while you sing. It'll be wonderful. I'll tell the joke about the foosball table again." But then it's all interrupted by a knock at the window. Bartell grabs his gun and goes to investigate. Whispers come from the door as Bartell and Boris come in. Boris is now holding a cow and says, "I found my dog. I found Bella. I was obstinate and I found her. Can you believe it, Bartell?" Bartell laughs and says, "I can't. Let's have a Christmas toast." They both look at quote-unquote Bella and dote over the cow. Mark, meanwhile, starts to whimper at the table. Mark then starts crying at the table at this whole situation, too. The camera then turns to both Boris and Bartell in a circle as they laugh at him. They mimic his crying noises and they laugh and laugh. The camera spins faster and faster and zooms into Mark's eyes as it looks like he's going crazy from all of this. But all of a sudden, Boris gets his guts blown out by a shotgun shell. Everyone stops and Bartell grabs his gun and breaks all the lights and yells for Mark to stay still. We see all the villagers outside with flashlights and a tracking pig. Mark screams out for them to help him, but Bartell then hits Mark with the butt of his gun and Mark is knocked to the floor dazed. We see from his point of view and it looks and feels like he has a concussion. Boris cries on the floor, barely alive, saying that he doesn't want to die, as shotgun blasts ring out and everything is muffled. The villagers are like zombies almost, trying to break into the house's windows, and Bartell's trying to hold them off with a shotgun. But Mark finds that comedy trophy from the beginning of the movie on the floor. He crawls over to it slowly and picks it up, and while Bartell is distracted, he jumps up and hits Bartell with it. The villagers then break in with the pig squealing loudly. The butcher is here too, as Bartell, Mark, and a dying Boris are on the floor. The villagers seem to ignore Mark at first, and they look at Bartell, who is struggling to breathe from the blow on the back of his head. The villagers then take the cow back, and Mark stares at the butcher. The butcher then stares back at Mark. Mark cries out, "It's happening!" as the butcher puts the barrel of the gun near Mark's face and tells him to sing. Sing like you used to. You're my wife now. Mark then sings half-heartedly and cries at the same time. The butcher simply asks, "Why did you even come back, Gloria?" Mark reiterates that he's not Gloria. The butcher says, "I loved you so much." But Mark cries and says, "I'm not Gloria! I am Mark Stevens!" The butcher then hits him and drags him to the corner of the room while the pig squeals wildly. The butcher drops Mark's pants, but before anyone can do anything about this, they finish Boris off on the ground with a blast to the head. And when that gunshot goes off, they all get stunned due to it being in a small room. Mark takes this opportunity and runs away out of the house. The butcher tells his men to go chase after him as he finally shoots Bartell in the face, killing him. After which, they all take their tracking pigs and chase after Mark. They're not going to let their new woman get away. They track him for days. Mark smartly wads through the river to get the pig off of his scent, but they just keep following. A good 10 minutes of Mark running and them chasing go by. After a while, the other villagers seem to lose heart. They don't want to track Mark anymore. The butcher tries to convince them to keep with this and they can use her however they want, but they all abandon the butcher as well, and he goes on ahead to look for Mark, alone. More montage shots of them pass. They must be walking for days, and eventually Mark looks behind him in a foggy forest, and he sees the butcher, very close behind now, but he keeps walking. Eventually they get to a snowy field, and Mark continues to walk slowly, but so does the butcher, very close behind now. But as the butcher gets close, he steps in some deep ice. He falls in the water and begins to sink, and he can't get out. He screams for help, and Mark turns around to look at the butcher. He's sinking and unable to get out of this frozen water. He reaches for Mark to help him, And as he sinks, the butcher reaches for Mark and begs some more. He cries once he realizes that Mark's not going to help him. So the butcher asks him one last time, "Why did you come back, Gloria? You did love me, didn't you? Tell me you loved me. Say it." And then the most powerful moment in the movie. As the butcher sinks further and further into his own doom, Mark looks down at him and says, "I loved you." The butcher sinks into the marshy frozen water to his own death, alone. The movie ends with several shots of nature and creepy music. That is it. That is the movie Calvaire. It is quite similar to the previous French extreme films, but not quite as explicit. That doesn't mean it's a bad movie or anything. I quite like it, in fact. It's just a lot more subtle with its horror. Its implications are more scary than the on-screen contents. So let's start with the analysis, shall we? I think this movie's most obvious theme is one we've covered before. What happens when love is no longer a good thing? In this movie, love is very much a bad thing. Or at least this kind of love. Bartell very much loved Gloria. That much is very clearly true. It's obvious he did. But when she left, or he killed her originally, it's hard to tell what actually happened to the original Gloria, or even if there was an original Gloria. Bartell broke after that. He no longer had any enthusiasm. However, when he meets someone like his former lover, he breaks even worse, or perhaps goes back to how he was. He thinks Mark is really his former wife. His love is what breaks him again. I also believe this movie is sort of showing what happens when we break people down to just their roles in society, their jobs, or their gender roles, or any sort of roles really. Mark takes the place of this stereotypical woman entertainer here. Obviously this movie is showing how that doesn't work and how people who break people down to base things like that really are. But Gloria, when she died or left or whatever, wasn't even really mourned by the village. Her role was mourned by the village. And then she was replaced. At first, unironically with animals like pigs, they stooped to, having relations with the animals, but then they stopped that once they think they found a woman again. Mark. Her role was replaced. One of the deepest things in this film that I can find is the idea of a performer, or a performance. People pleasers. At the beginning of the movie, Mark performs a love song. And an old woman believes that she was entitled to him because of this song was in her head for her. He was in love with her, right? But then later there is a parallel with almost every single other person with the movie after, although it's less obvious. Bartell thinks that once again that the performer, his so-called wife, is his. The songs are for him. The performance is for him. Then after that, the villagers fight over Mark because obviously the performance is for them, right? Not Bartell, not for anyone else. The fact that Mark is an emotional people pleaser ruins him. It's also sort of a cautionary tale of parasocial relationships. But Mark is obviously not doing this for anyone but himself, really. He is a people pleaser. The fact that Mark is an emotional people pleaser ruins him. The movie is a cautionary tale of people pleasing as well, instead of focusing on yourself every once in a while. The fact that he is performing love songs for those that he does not really love is showing of that. He denies the love for himself to please everybody else. That leads me to my final point. The final line in the movie, the most powerful and cryptic part of the movie. Why does Mark tell the butcher as he's dying, "I loved you"? Was it a final people-pleasing line? Was it the insanity finally catching up to Mark? Or was it a mercy to the dying man? We don't know, but I think that's the point. Make your own conclusions at that point. So I don't really think there is a right answer. The right answer is to make your own conclusion. At the end of the world, when no one is watching, are you a people pleaser? Is it an act? Or is it mercy? Or is it a performance in and of itself? Thank you for watching. I really did enjoy this movie for those two scenes in particular, the weird-ass dancing scene and then the final one. Both are extremely powerful and sometimes cryptic. Because of that, I really loved the movie. I hope you all loved it too, because I think this is my second favorite extreme French movie we've covered. It's kind of amazing how those two scenes can carry the whole movie though. You are all wonderful for making it this far, and I really appreciate you all. We've gotten a lot of new subscribers since last week's video, 100% match, and I hope you all enjoy your time here with my videos and my channel. If you want to be on the screen at the end of these videos, like the people you see on the screen right now, You can become a super supporter on my Patreon in the description of this video. It's obviously not necessary, but appreciated. I love you all. I will see you in next week's Extreme Book Club for The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka.